environmental stewardship, social justice, global health care, even to help assist in the question of how do we deal with artificial intelligence and the ethics around that. And again, we see the World Evangelical Alliance, along with other groups, partaking with the World Economic Forum. This is a coming together, a merger. Then, just a couple of weeks back in February, in fact, the very first week of February, is the United Nations World Interfaith Harmony Week. And the pictures that you see are all taken from different Twitter feeds during that week, as everything from the ambassador of Ireland to the United Nations, to the royal family, to the New York Police Department, are all saying, hey, this is what we're doing for World Interfaith Harmony Week. All faiths can come together and work for social justice or the community good or for some great grand cause. So where does this begin? Where is its rootedness? A long time ago, 1893. 1893 is the Chicago World Fair, the Chicago Columbian Exposition, and the world convened. The world gathered to see what incredible displays of industry and might would be found at the Columbian Exposition. At the same time, the one event that occurred during that exposition, which has remade the world, was the Parliament, the very first one, the Parliament of the world's religions. It was the first time where the East and the West merged in a significant way, the East coming specifically through the personality of Swami Vivekananda, who traveled from India all the way to Chicago to partake in the first Parliament. 78% of the speakers at the first Parliament were Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox, marking this as a major milestone in ecumenicism. This energized, at that time, the burgeoning social gospel movement with its idea of righteous internationalism, and it was foundational to the birth of world federalism, the League of Nations. It fits within that milieu, and it shifted the West towards this idea of religious pluralism and gave us the modern interfaith movement. So here's a few statements. This is from the original proposal for the 1893 Parliament. Notice the broadness in terms of the hope for scope. A parliament of nations that would surpass all previous efforts to bring about a real fraternity of nations and unite the enlightened people of the whole earth in a generalized cooperation for the attainment of the great ends for which human society is organized. We are coming together, nations of the world. The unofficial Parliament motto was from the famous poem Locksley Hall. Till the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled, in the Parliament of Man, the Federation of the World. So already the very first interfaith Parliament bridged this concept of one world, all nations coming together in some type of world federation. A couple of statements to kind of give you a sense of just the hope, the visioning that was involved at that event. Charles Bonney, who was the organizer for the Parliament, said this, and by the way, the capitalization is in the original. This day, the sun of a new era of religious peace and progress rises over the world. This day, a new flower blooms in the garden of religious thought. This day, a new fraternity is born into the world of human progress to aid in the upbuilding of the kingdom of God in the hearts of men. It is the brotherhood of religions. One of the other speakers put it this way: the religion of the future will be universal in every sense. It will embody all the thoughts and aspirations and virtues and emotions of all humanity. It will draw together all lands and peoples and kindreds and tongues into a universal brotherhood of love and service. It will establish upon earth a heavenly order. We build heaven on earth. That is the flavor that comes out with the Parliament in 1893. And as somebody who has attended a number of parliaments, that is the flavor that still remains today. So Swami Vivekananda, who travels all the way from India, he arrives a little bit early in Chicago. His story is quite remarkable. He had a difficult time raising the funds at first to get from India to Chicago, but he received donations, he received help. When he showed up in Chicago, he was taken in by some of the socialites of the city, And his story is actually quite a remarkable story. So he shows up at the Parliament. He's unknown. He's a bit of a wild card. He's a Hindu representative, traveled all the way from India. And the crowd, which is mostly, in terms of percentages, made up of people who would claim to be Christian, go wild. This is the rock star. Here's the man who came all this distance to share with us his wisdom, this Eastern truth. And when you read through, and I wasn't there, obviously, it's 1893, I'd be deader than a doornail by now, right? But when you read through the accounts, you can't help but get a sense of the excitement. It's almost palpable through the pages as the people were shouting and applause and ovation, and how he couldn't even walk across the stage without people erupting in this great applause. So much so were they looking forward to what this man had to say. So these are a few of the excerpts, and I've read his speeches, a few of the excerpts from his presentations. We believe not only in universal tolerance, but we accept all religions as true. Ye are the children of God, the sharers of immortal bliss, holy and perfect beings, ye divinities on earth, sinners. It is a sin to call a man so. It is a standing liable on human nature. Come up, O lions, and shake off the delusion that you are sheep. The Christian is not to become a Hindu or a Buddhist, nor a Hindu or a Buddhist to become a Christian, but each must assimilate the spirit of the others. Oh yes, I write in Game of Gods how I went to the Krishna temple south of Salt Lake City. Everybody thinks of Salt Lake City and Utah as the ground zero for Mormonism, and it is. But just go south of Salt Lake City to Spanish Fork, Utah, which is the most heavy concentration of Mormons in the state, in that county, and you're going to find what's called the Lotus Temple, a Krishna temple. And I spent time interacting with the guru, who gave me permission to take pictures after spending some time listening to his spiel. And he said that this way, he says, we are evangelizing the West. And we're doing it through yoga and the Holi festival, Holi color runs. And he said to me, you're never going to, and I'm just paraphrasing, you're never going to join an ashram, but you're all becoming Hindu in spirit because you're already accepting their worldview. And he's not wrong. That's where we're at as a culture. Anyways, I digress. My first interfaith event was back in 1999 in Washington, D.C., a meeting between the United Religions Initiative, which at that point was trying to set itself up to become the United Nations of Religions, and it still wants to see that as a goal, and it's still a major interfaith organization, them meeting with the World Federalist Association, the largest pro-world government lobby group in the U.S. And the two of them came together, major personalities from both organizations. They ended up drafting a statement, and it read this: government can have spiritual as well as practical value. We participants in today's conference affirm the initiatives from both political and religious realms in the aim of human peace and justice. We call for a widening circle of dialogue and of efforts involving world religions working together constructively with the trends towards the ideals of world government. The two, religions and the idea of world federalism, would come together. We are working as religious leaders for world government. This was done in the Foundry United Methodist Church, just a few blocks from the White House. By the way, Foundry United Church was the church that Bill and Hillary Clinton would go to, and Bill Clinton actually gave sermons at Foundry United Methodist Church. I'd be curious as to what those sermons were about. Anyways, let me take you to Winnipeg. 2010. Winnipeg, in the summer of 2010, held the G8 World Religion Summit. A lot of folks know when the G8 and the G20 political summits take place. It's in the news. It's a national, global event when you have political leaders from the G8 or the G20 come together. But most people, most Christians for sure, don't realize that there's an interfaith component. And there has been for years an interfaith forum attached to the G8 and the G20 political assemblies, where religious leaders come together to talk about what the policies should look like, what recommendations they should give to assist world leaders in putting forward their agendas. So in 2010, one happened in Winnipeg. While the G8 political summit was happening in Toronto and people were, protesting, and we're Canadians, so we protest peacefully. Maybe somebody stole some Tim Hortons cards or something. I mean, it's not like Seattle or other parts of the world, but yeah, as they're protesting the G8, then as the G8 was meeting, world religious leaders were in Winnipeg, convening under the direction of a special committee made up, I found later, mostly world federalists. And we were told that there's not only one way, but that there are many ways to God, and we are now calling to serve this God we know by so many names. So who was there? Who was involved in this event? The Baha'i community. That doesn't surprise me. They have their own prophecies of a coming global order with its own world government and a united religion and a single global currency. The Baha'is work feverishly to that end at the United Nations. When I'm involved in attending global governance events, they are inevitably there pushing that agenda as well. We had representatives from Judaism, the Tony Blair Faith Foundation. Saudi Arabia sent 2 representatives from the Ministry of Islamic Affairs with their long flowing robes. And in they came. Karen Hamilton, the lady in the red, she was at that time on the board, the national board, because we in Canada have a World Federalist Movement or a World Federalist Association of Canada, but she was also on the board of the Canadian Council of Churches. And there we have just some pictures of kind of what the event looked like. Here's the other representation. It's us. It's us. In fact, we were the bulk of the event. World Evangelical Alliance, not surprised. National Council of Churches, Canadian Council of Churches, not surprised knowing who made up the board. Evangelical Fellowship of Canada was brought on as a strategic partner. I don't even think they really knew what they were getting involved with. And that oftentimes is the case. Like, why are you there? Why are you participating? And on it goes. Mennonite Church Canada, Canadian Food Grains Bank, Salvation Army, World Vision. And this is just a sampling of those who were officially represented at the G8 World Religion Summit. Well, what did we talk about? Well, openly talked about how religions need to come together and work for the common good, for world peace, for social justice. Some of the big takeaways was this, that spiritual leaders have sometimes more power than national governments. This was an aha moment for those religious leaders in attendance, as they realized that their constituency often transcends national borders. And it does. The Anglican community is global. The Catholic community is global. We have Baptist congregations. We even have Mennonite congregations that have a multinational scope and reach. So all of a sudden it was realized, we have the power to influence a broader base than maybe even national governments do. That was an aha moment for a lot of those in attendance. Much discussion about how we need to restructure the global financial system, that we need a global taxation regime, we need a new economic order. The Salvation Army representative said this, it's not about having a bike for each, it's about learning to share one bike in community. No thank you. That's Cuba. That's North Korea. That's the former Soviet Union. We don't want to go down that road. We know what that looks like. You can share your bike with your friends and leave me alone, please. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Come on, folks. We know where this goes. Much discussion of having a sense of respecting nature. In fact, having the gospel of respecting nature. We need eco-justice. We were told that we are the biggest parasites on earth, that we need to embrace earth loyalties, that capitalists have to pay their eco-debt, whatever that looks like. And we need to create some type of global eco-ethic. Religions need to have a massive vision quest for Mother Earth. We in the religious community, you as pastors and ministers, need to help empower the United Nations. And the big takeaway, not just the fact that they have a larger constituency with more clout than they realized, was that where the rubber hits the road, it's not about who is democratically elected and who might be in office for 4 years and then leaves the office. But no, Religious leaders, for the most part, are in there for life. And we, therefore, are the planetary spokesman. We are planetary statesmen. There's longevity, and we can bring that longevity to the international community. The two come together, religion and politics. So let me take you to the mothership of the interfaith movement, and that is the modern Parliament of the World Religions. So, on the one side is the history. I did not go, obviously, to the 1893 Parliament. I did not go to the 93 Parliament with its 8,000 attendees where it launched a global ethic. I have friends who were there. The next one happened in 1999 in Cape Town. And by the way, a lot of people look at that and go, 1893, 1993, it's 100 years, nothing happened. Oh, so much happened in between. So much. It just took 100 years to be able to say the time is ripe. The time is indeed ripe. 2009 happened in Barcelona, then Melbourne. In 2008, with his focus on Indigenous spirituality. And on the other side in the red, those are all the ones that I have attended. 2015, we had 10,000 in attendance, focuses on women and climate change. 2018 was in Toronto. The theme was inclusion and love. And then the virtual one in 2021, and I give them credit. They did a really good job in building a virtual platform. Roughly 3,000 attended and over 500 workshops took place in the virtual realm. And of course, COVID was a major discussion point. And then last summer, back in Chicago, back to the Windy City. Oh, by the way, do you guys know why Chicago is called the Windy City? Because it has wind? No, it's just Saskatchewan's got wind. Saskatoon's the Windy City. Swift Current's the Windy City. No. In 1893, leading up to the 1893 Columbian Exposition, the organizers said to America, we're going to do a Columbian Exposition, a world fair that's going to beat out what happened in Paris only a couple of years before. The socialites in the U.S., in New York, and Washington, D.C. said, you're going to pull this off in 3 years? You're going to build, and they built a city of, I think, 300 buildings, one of them being the largest footprint on the planet. The very first Ferris wheel, and it was a huge Ferris wheel, a Ferris wheel that could hold up to 2,000 people per rotation, was structured and built for that event. And so the East Coast U.S. said, you're full of baloney. You're blowing hot air. And so that is how Chicago became known as the Windy City. Because they pulled it off. That's the crazy part. They pulled it off. And so back to Chicago last summer with the theme of freedom and democracy, climate change, and the need to reinstate the idea of a global ethic. So I'm just going to take you briefly to the 18 Parliament in Toronto and then touch on the virtual, just so you have a sense of the continuity, and then take you to the 2023 event. And by the way, I could just go on for hours on each event because each of them are a week long. I sure brought the agenda book because it's like thick, very, very, very thick. And I would need to clone myself. Don, you're talking on technology. Maybe you can talk about how I can clone myself for the next Parliament. About 100 times to be able to cover it all. It's huge. So here we are at the gathering in Toronto. Thousands of people are coming together for the opening ceremony. And it's a cacophony. It's loud, lots and lots of music. There's lots of things going on. It's very colorful. Who's all there? Are they all religious leaders? I'm not going to go through this list, but this just gives you a sense of what's or who is at the table. It's religious leaders, yes, but it's also United Nations officials. It's also people from NGOs, from the Club of Rome. It's people who are coming who are involved in some fashion within the international community. Or in the case of I can never pronounce his name properly, Ahmed Hussein, Federal Minister of Immigration, our Federal Minister. Kim Campbell was there. Remember Kim Campbell? Used to be our Canadian Prime Minister for an itty-bitty little while. Yeah, she was there as a luminary. So it's not just religious leaders. It's this convergence between politics and religion. So just some images of what you're going to see when you come with me to the next Parliament. You're all coming, I hope. You're going to see spontaneous dances for peace break out. As people hold hands, it doesn't matter what your religious background is, you're engaging in this grand vision of Kumbaya. Or you're going to have energy healing, non-touch Reiki or some other form of energy modality. and you're going to be seeing healings happen or something like that. On the bottom, you're going to see a labyrinth. And there was labyrinths, I remember, that was a big fad for a while in Christian churches. As all of a sudden we were embracing an esoteric, mystical tool. Shame on us. Shame on us to embrace the things that we shouldn't be doing. And then we had a red tent temple structured at the 2018 Parliament. We had one in the 2015. And you're going to see the 2023, we had one there as well. Now that's the red tent temple is to celebrate women, you women, and your sacred monthly flow. I know you just, yeah, I know. It's hard actually to say this in a straight face, but seriously, your sacred monthly flow. And us guys, obviously, we don't have that. And there we can now encounter your divine feminine. And there's workshops and there's rituals and ceremonies around your womb. And it was considered to be the womb of the Parliament. So this, in 2018, this was the year that we saw the U.S. midterm elections. And Jim Wallace from Sojourners was there as a progressive Christian, and he gave us one of the keynote addresses. Now, it fit with the flavor of what we heard throughout the event. Throughout the event, we were told repeatedly there's no room for exclusive religious claims, separating faith's uniqueness of Jesus. This is divisive. Free market capitalism is evil and immoral. Nationalism is the greatest threat. You're a supremacist. We were told this repeatedly. Jim Wallace talked about the midterm election as a battle between angels and demons. If you're supporting Trump, you're supporting demons. Now, I mean, I'm a Canadian. We're almost, I think, all Canadians in here with the exception of a handful. For us in Toronto, at this event in Toronto, we were all kind of surprised going, I'm sorry, but we can't vote Democrat or Republican. Like, seriously, leave this out. But no, we couldn't leave this out. We had to tackle this in a big way. So Jim Wallace was, his speech was, the rhetoric, put it this way, was harsh enough that as we engaged with some of the volunteers of the Parliament, because we're there asking questions as well, they were embarrassed by what was said. Because this was supposed to be about, if you see the fine print on the board, the promise of inclusion, the power of love, your demons. And back to that theme, love and inclusion. This was one of the art pieces that was constructed over the course of the week at the Parliament. And so you see a lady, she's wearing a black top with a red flower skirt underneath, and she has a clerical collar. She's a Baptist minister, and she has used the Buddhist Sand Mandala art form to create a mandala of Kali, the Hindu deity of death and destruction, holding the severed head of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh, and having around Kali's belts the severed heads of those who confirmed Kavanaugh. Love and inclusion. And so we watched, and I have it on video. We watched as they did a dance invocation to Kali at the end of the week, asking Kali to come forth and bring justice against those who would support that side of the political aisle. Ironically, I think that was the same week that the allegations against Kavanaugh were proven to be false. And he wasn't guilty of the charges that had been laid against him. Didn't matter. The narrative had already been played. The story was out there. A narrative was already in motion. And so we call on Kali to bring down Kavanaugh. There was a workshop on how to reach you, the exclusivists, evangelicals. So these are a couple of slides from that workshop. Exclusives are the interfaith movement's most significant challenge and also its greatest opportunity. So this is, and I've got the audio of it. I actually was in a different workshop, but thankfully we have a small team who was there, and so I got the audio from that event. And so this is from the audio. This is the breakdown of how to reach the exclusivists, how to reach your church. And I'm going to put it as me being the social change agent, the interfaith change agent coming to your church, I would approach your congregation and I would not make contact with the senior pastor. I'll make contact with the youth leader or the associate pastor, because the senior pastor is likely grounded and is already set in his ways. And then I'm going to frame this interfaith agenda within the language of community development, social justice, sustainable development, all that in those nice terms. I'll leverage the Bible verses. I will know which Bible verses to use to have this broader acceptance of love and this broader understanding of coming together in unity. And then I'm going to have by the time I'm said and done with your guy, I'll have him going, yeah, let's meet with somebody from the other side. And so I'll have him meet with one religious leader from a different faith only. I'm not going to bring more into the mix, not until you accept the fact that the imam down the street shares the same spiritual truth you do. And then maybe I'll take you to the Hindus or to the Sikhs and build all of this under the context of community development, social justice, and we'll solidify it around that. That was the game plan. We talk about you at the Parliament of World Religions. So the 2021 Parliament, I'm just going to give you just this one little snapshot. Again, it was virtual because of course, COVID. But it was interesting how it didn't matter what faith you represented, Christian or Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, or pagan, you all spoke the same language. You all said the same things. And there was lots of talk of the equality of all spiritual paths, carbon taxes, paying your fair share, whatever that means. Nobody can ever give you a real definition of what that means, just pay more. COVID demonstrated our global interdependence. We are now one, and we can see this through the actions of COVID. We have to rebuild a new global economy and end capitalism. You have to empower the United Nations, and we preach oneness, that God, man, and nature are all essentially the same. So now let me quickly take you to Chicago, back to where it all began in 1893. And by this point, you should be able to figure out that if they're saying we're going to defend freedom and human rights, that's pretty much the opposite. And I am not kidding. So some of the speakers at the 2023 event, the Archdiocese of Chicago, Marianne Williamson, who was at the 2015 Parliament, and when she gave her speech at the 2015 Parliament, it was during the women's plenary. Thousands of women in the room, the estrogen just flowed, and it was wild. And when it was all said and done, Marianne Williamson had everybody whipped up to a frenzy, and people were shouting, "Marianne for president, Marianne for president," and it was pretty intense. And then a few months later, for the next presidential round, Marianne came out to run on the Democrat ticket. Anyways, she was there. The United Nations Secretary General gave us a private video feed, along with Nancy Pelosi and Richard Rohr, the Franciscan contemplative mystic. He was there. Quite a list of folks. So what do you see? On the very bottom, that is the exhibition hall. Booth after booth after booth. From every faith that you've never heard of to faiths that you know well, it's all there being represented. All kinds of campaigns and initiatives. On the top, again, a labyrinth so that you could go and take your journey to the center and wrestle with the monster and find your divinity. In the very center, 10 principles for climate repentance. The year before, there was a 10 new set of commandments for climate change that had been put forward at the climate change conference in Egypt. And so that was there for all of us to see. On the very top corner, ask Jesus. We added Jesus artificial intelligence. And so you could log on to the AI and you could talk to the AI Jesus at the Parliament. And at the bottom, we celebrated your womb again. Got to go there. So, a few other just quick pictures. The very bottom, we had Universal Freemasonry represented. I ended up having a good conversation with that gentleman. We had Wicca, lots of Wiccan representation. On the very top, there is a a Hindu giving a blessing and also engaged in healing activities. Some really interesting things that you'll see when you go to the Parliament. The gentleman on the top with the peace vigil sign, I had a long conversation with him. He has walked the world. Literally. He has walked around the world with his peace signs. He is funded to go around the world preaching this gospel of global peace and oneness. That's what he does. And he believes in it. He believes in it firmly. It is a faith. And he takes that faith and puts it into action and takes his feet and walks and shares this gospel of one world. Quite a bit of pagan representation. So in the imagery, the very top, the lady who's got the smile and the long hair, she is one of America's foremost witches. I've been in events with her, and this is a ritual to ask for healing for the earth. On the bottom, there, the image that you're seeing is where the sacred fire was lit, and all through the course of the Parliament, day after day after day, they had a fire lit ceremoniously so that the indigenous spirituality, that element, would be a part of the Parliament. What looks like Zig Heil, that is a witchcraft ritual asking a blessing on Lake Michigan, because all this is being done on the shores of Lake Michigan. And so they're calling on the spirits of the east, the west, the north, and the south. What was interesting with this one was I was with my friend Mark, who has never been to an event like this, and I dragged him along with, and another part of our team, another guy by the name of Jeff, dragged him to this and said, you guys got to see this. Jeff has seen stuff like this, but Mark hasn't. And Mark froze. He just froze in place. And I've been around this enough to know, okay, how you move around, it's how you can become more or less invisible as you're in these kinds of settings. Mark couldn't be invisible, and he froze. And we have these people turning, and now they're turning like you to me away with their hand up like this. And they're looking at us and invoking the spirits of the West and blah, blah, blah. And Mark is just like a deer in the headlight. And it was kind of interesting because that actually spurred a conversation. Later on, and it was actually a girl I literally bumped into at this ritual. I was taking pictures and bumped into her. I said sorry because I'm a Canadian, and she was nice and didn't punch me. And later on, she sees Mark and I standing off to the corner having a little conversation, and she walks by and says hi kind of thing. About 20 minutes later, I'm going to a restaurant, and there she is. And I walk up. My team is actually just a table or two from hers. And as I'm walking by her, she looks at me and she goes, so what did you think? And I sat down because at that point, all of a sudden, you're compelled. Sit down. Sit down. So I ended up having a conversation for an hour with her. And she was like, you guys were so out of place. So out of place. I'm like, yeah, my friend Mark was like, he was pretty freaked. Mark's a great guy. Don't get me wrong. I'm not rubbing Mark. He's a fantastic guy. And I'm like, yeah, one of our team, he was really, really uneasy by what he was seeing. I've said I've seen quite a bit of this stuff before, so it doesn't really bother me. And then we end up having this big conversation. It turns out she's an interfaith minister. She's a pagan. She has never been to an interfaith event, though. She'd never been to a parliament. And when she found out I'd been to a number of them, she's going, why are there so many United Nations people here? Why is there so many people from the global community? So we ended up having that conversation. And then she found out I was a Christian researcher. And then on it goes. All of a sudden, we're talking about oneism versus twoism. Is reality one, or is it two? God separate and distinct. Which is it? She never thought of that before. And so we ended up having this huge conversation that went from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And it was good. Later on, the next day, I bumped into her again. And I can't go into the story, it's kind of wild and weird. I had a copy of my book for her, and she was like, yes. And we ended up having a number of conversations throughout the course of the week. So I'm just glad my friend Mark was so out of place. And I bumped into her as well. So this is, I'm going to just play you real quick. This is the Cosmic Mass that took place at the Parliament. Now, the Cosmic Mass has wine and bread. It is a Mass. And for about 2 hours, it's a multi-layered ritual and ceremony to the Christ consciousness and to Mother Earth. And this is the circle dance that took place. Notice to what, how, or the words that are being sung. Fire I am. Water, earth. Spirit I am. You have Christians, Muslims, and Sikhs, and pagans, people from all kinds of faiths. When this cosmic mass was taking place, our little group, and we have a ragtag group of people who've been going for a number of years to these events, we're just off to the side. I mean, I'm just there to document. I'm there to watch and observe, and then to bring all this forward to you. And then we end up having a point in the ceremony when the moderator said, find a partner and say what's sacred to you. I'm like, okay, I'm just against the wall. I want to be invisible. No, thank you. And I had a very nice lady come up to me. She's an elderly lady in her 80s, found out she was from Delaware. And she came up to me and she says, can you be my partner? Okay. Ladies first. I have that prerogative. Ladies first. And so she told me all about the sacredness of the cosmos and her own sacred divinity, and I'm sacred, and on and on. And we had about a minute to each give a little talk back and forth. So I said to her, I will tell you something different. And then I gave her oneness and twoism. And then I broke down the fact that I am not sacred, that I have a sinful nature, that Jesus Christ is the author of life because he is distinct. And in about a minute to a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I broke it all down for her. And she stood there and she looked at me with wide eyes and said, I have never heard this before. Okay, we all think, even somebody who's 80 years old in America, in North America, you have heard the gospel. No, not broken down in its fundamental principles. We have to get down to what is fundamental, because we are living in a Romans 1 culture. We are living in the exact opposite of the early church, which emerged out of a pagan worldview. Now we're entering back into it as a church. So we have to get down back to the basics, literally ground zero. God is distinct. He is other. At another point in time, we had a different little part of this ceremony where we were supposed to go around and say that you are divine. And just that's all you had to do. Look into each other's eyes and say, I am divine, or you are divine. And again, I'm off to the side. No thanks, I'm not there to do that. But again, I had 4 different ladies come to me. Again, ladies first. Kind of gives me half a second to freak out and go, what am I going to say to these people? And then they're like, I see the divinity in you. And I had to say, I have to tell you something different. You are a daughter of Eve, and I see the humanity in you. And it's interesting, the response. One of them literally was trembling and said, thank you. All of a sudden, just something different. You are not divine. Women, you are daughters of Eve. That's what you are. So you can have those little points of contact. Itty-bitty seeds. Sometimes that's all you can do. Itty-bitty seeds. And you put them out there. You see what happens. We all want the harvest. Most of you probably come from a farming background. I do. I grew up on a grain farm. I know that before a combine ever hits the field, that had to be sowed first, didn't it? And then you had to tend and maintain that crop over the course of the summer before it ever gets into the bin. We all want the harvest. Are you willing to plant some seeds because it isn't going to happen unless we do. Thank you. I got the 5-minute sign, so I've got to move a little bit quicker. But we're closer towards the end. So some of the statements from the Parliament to give you some ideas. Interspirituality is the religion of this new century. It's the world religious leaders who ultimately bring the world together. These are all statements I took from my notes at the Parliament. We're building heaven on earth. We birth heaven right here. It's the end of the old world order, the start of the new world order, one humanity, one earth. We are the resurrection who leads to the promised land. Salvation is not individual, but is collective. One of the workshops was on the role of psychedelics and how psychedelics need to be integrated into seminaries and into chaplaincy services. And psychedelics has entered a renaissance phase. Psychedelics, for those of you who may not know, have really made a comeback in a remarkable way and are poised to make a big impact in the Christian community. It already is. So this is Richard Rohr on the bottom. Here's the workshops on plant medicines. I'm not going to read it all through, but, well, I'll read it. We have a couple of minutes. Once the whole world becomes sacramental, when things like psilocybin, magic mushrooms basically, come along, that we make use of it like we make use of bread and wine and oil and water, I think the experience I've witnessed and experienced in plant medicines precisely fills that description. It shouldn't be seen as something negative or heretical or scary or wrong, because what is given to you is clearly in the realm of grace. If psilocybins are going to offer us a new avenue or way to be granted a unitive, non-dual spiritual experience, then we would be stupid to not get out of the way. Yes, indeed, psychedelics has made a comeback. One of the other workshops was on how faith-based groups, and I did not realize how many churches, mainline churches, have tremendous money tied up in the global stock market. Tremendous money. And so this was a workshop. Karina Gore, Al Gore's daughter, is on the panel there. This was a workshop with religious fund managers coming together to talk about how in one fell swoop, if they could just coordinate their actions, they could undermine the global financial system and wipe out the petroleum industry by undermining it through divesting of funds on the global stock exchanges. Pretty big issues, including the promotion, and this is now on the table, of a United Nations non-proliferation treaty on fossil fuels. In other words, making it illegal at the global level to engage in fossil fuel extraction and exploration. Some pretty crazy stuff. When it comes to the issue of Israel, there was a workshop held. This is from the Agenda book. There is increasing consensus today in the global human rights movement of Israelis' policies and practices toward millions of Palestinians constitute the crime of apartheid. Religious communities from around the world have vocalized their affirmation of this by adopting policy resolutions on apartheid, holding educational conversations, building coalitions, and advocating for Palestinian rights. An interfaith conversation on how to respond to the recognition of Israeli apartheid and the important role of people of faith in calling for change. And then, repeatedly, freedom and human rights, the problem of right-wing misinformation. Trump is the closest thing to the Antichrist. Oh, my word, the rhetoric was just so raw, and we heard this every single day. And then this is the takeaway. As somebody who has literally been watching and been embedded in the interfaith community since 1999, I can tell you how the language has changed. We have moved from being called fundamentalists. We could all have a conversation about what that means. We were fundamentalists. Now, the language has shifted. It has shifted from being fundamentalists to being exclusivists and then extremists. Extremists were having a harder time having that conversation about what that looks like. 2018 at the Parliament, now we're supremacists. The language that I heard repeatedly, and I mean every single day in 2023, was, "You are authoritarians." And what is the next language change? In one of the workshops that my friend Don Vanneau was in, you, as evangelicals, are terrorists. So that gives you a sense. We're almost out of time. What to do with Jesus Christ? That's the big stumbling block. So this is from the 2021 Virtual Parliament, the John 14:6 project. This is from the agenda. The exclusivity of this verse continues to be a malignancy on Christian theology and proclamation, further rendering authentic dialogue with other faith traditions very difficult. All who share an openness to discuss the problematic nature of John 14:6 are invited to join the conversation. And then from 2023, within Christianity, that dialogue must address the elephant in our living room, Jesus Christ as the only way to salvation. This interactive session is designed to help participants explore difficult foundational passages and teachings and find alternatives to the pervasive exclusivist interpretations of Christianity. 2018, Larry Greenfield, the executive director of the Parliament, called it for what it is as he thanked all of us in the room for our work in saving Earth. Thanks to all of those who are committed to the salvation of the earth. This is an alternative salvation message. As Swami Vivekananda said in 1893, the religion of the future will recognize divinity in every man and woman, and whose whole scope, whose whole force will be created in aiding humanity to realize its own true divine nature. Offer such a religion, and all the nations will follow you. What a statement. So there's our little ragtag group. And I'll just close with this. We're there. Some of us are there to do the research. That's my job more than anything else. But you're looking for conversations where you can have them. On the very top, along the top, we got two Marks in the big picture. Mark with the blue shirt, and then my friend Mark sitting in front. One without the blue shirt was the one who froze during the Wiccan event. The one with the blue shirt, he has a specialty with the Moonies. Where do you think he goes? He's going to go hang out with the Moonies. Each of them have some specialty, some area, and they are interacting. And every 10 feet, you can have a conversation with somebody of another faith, and you can share yours. You literally can do that. So my friend Mark, when it was all said and done, was going, how come we don't have busloads of Christians coming? We can have conversations here. This is, yes, globally the Death Star, but we can actually walk right to the heart of the Death Star and bring in Jesus. Hello. Why are you afraid? So we're just going to close up. Is Jesus Christ the only way? Yes. And we got to get back to that fundamental. We need to get back to that truth and be able to express it in a way that our pluralistic neighbors can understand. And we need to express it so our churches get the importance of this, because that's what's at stake in terms of the interfaith movement. Thank you so much for your attention this afternoon. And if you want to know more about this movement, grab a hold of my book. I have an entire chapter devoted just to this interfaith movement.
Thank you.